They're not vampires, though they're highly sensitive to blood. They're not krakens, but they lurk below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. And they're not just a prop for B-list Hollywood movies. They're sharks, and they're as real as you and I. Welcome to Fierce's Shark Marathon, a collection of some of the most gruesome stories involving the most feared fish on our planet. After hearing these stories, you might want to think twice before swimming in the ocean. Her initial cries for help were ignored and taken for nothing more than a childish prank meant to frighten other beachgoers. In this video, we'll tell the story of Sarah Whiley, a young woman who met her end in the shark-infested waters of Amity Point on North Stradbroke Island, Australia. There are many versions of this story out there. This one is based on recurring details that can be found in most, if not all of them. Make sure to let us know what you think really happened in the comments below. January 7, 2006. 21-year-old Sarah Whiley was visiting North Stradbroke Island with several of her friends from a church group. They were having a normal, fun day at the beach in the waters of Amity Point, where they were renting a holiday house. They were tourists on North Stradbroke Island, and with this came a serious fault. Unlike locals of the island, Sarah and her group didn't know just how dangerous those particular waves were, and they weren't aware that in those weather conditions, sharks were more likely to come closer to shore, dangerously looking for any source of nutrition. As the day was coming to an end, Sarah Whiley unwittingly rushed toward a fateful, bloody encounter, one that would spark a conversation about the safety of Australian waters. Also known as Straddy, or North Straddy, North Stradbroke Island is located in the Australian state of Queensland, just some 19 miles southeast of the center of Brisbane. It's the home of Amity, a rural town which is scarce in locals but abundant in tourists. The village is situated on the northwestern point of North Stradbroke Island, known as Amity Point. Directly adjacent to it lies Rainbow Channel, the entry to Moreton Bay. The channel is close to shore, but it's also tidal and deep. As the locals know, shark sightings aren't rare. But Sarah Whiley wasn't a local. She was a tourist who loved swimming, and she was good at it. She had been swimming before she could even walk. According to her family, being in water was Sarah's second nature. It was normal for her to push her limits as she moved swiftly through the waves. But as fate sometimes has it, her biggest pleasure would also bring her untimely end. January 7, 2006 was an extraordinarily overcast day. The sky was completely covered in clouds, and there wasn't much light. Even more, there had been a fairly big storm the previous night. That meant that the water was still murky and quite dirty. There was a lot of wash-off. Still, it wasn't enough to deter 21-year-old Sarah Whiley and her church friends from taking a swim. The group of friends got in the waters at Amity Point. The beach was unpatrolled, which may have contributed to the appeal of the place. The day was slowly coming to an end, but there was still time for a couple more minutes of frolicking in the waves. It was initially reported that Sarah Whiley was swimming in water not even up to her neck when disaster struck. However, according to witnesses, the girl swam out of the clear shallows and into the deeper water of Rainbow Channel. Being an experienced swimmer, Sarah was probably confident in her abilities. But as it turned out, she shouldn't have been worried about her prowess. Instead, she should have been worried about what hid beneath the waves. Soon she came upon marker buoys signifying the presence of drumlines. Drumlines are aquatic traps meant particularly for large sharks. Usually deployed near popular swimming beaches, they're used to lure and capture the predators in order to reduce the probability of shark attacks. Getting close to the drumlines meant Sarah Whiley was getting close to baits and aquatic detritus. By swimming there, the young woman put herself at risk, but she did so unknowingly. By the time she got there, it was probably too late to alter the gruesome course of the events. Sarah was making her way back, swimming toward the shore. She wasn't very far away from her friends when it all happened. Suddenly, she disappeared. When she emerged 5 or 6 seconds later, there was just one word she could utter. "Shark!" she screamed, terrified and hurt. Her friends and other beachgoers couldn't see anything at first, so naturally they thought the young woman was joking, trying to pull a prank on her friends, especially since there were a lot of dolphins in the water. Meanwhile, Sarah was being mauled by sharks. When she started screaming again, people finally realized the severity of the situation. Her friends rushed toward the young woman, and so did other beachgoers. Accounts of what exactly happened vary wildly. What we do know is that after realizing Sarah was actually in mortal danger, people rushed to help her. Among them was Josiah Tupou, who was at the beach with his pregnant wife and his 5 kids. When he heard the screams of terror, Josiah sprung into action. There was a chance the girl was only joking, yes, but what if she was drowning and yelled "shark" because she knew it would catch the attention of more people? Or what if there were truly sharks in the water attacking her? As he made his way in the water, Josiah could see Sarah bobbing up and down, struggling. His relative, Ungu Tupou, also rushed to help. When he went to grab Sarah's arm in order to pull her out, the man was terrified to see her arm simply wasn't there anymore. Rescuers finally managed to get Sarah out of the water. They used towels, trying to stem the blood flow. Sarah's injuries were extensive. It was plain to see her condition was critical. The girl was bleeding heavily. Her arms, her legs, and her torso had all suffered horrific injuries. When Queensland ambulance paramedics reached her, Sarah was barely alive. Her friends and other beachgoers were left in shock, hugging and crying long after paramedics had departed with Sarah. She was airlifted to Brisbane's Alexandra Hospital and was reportedly rushed into surgery. It wasn't enough to save her. 21-year-old Sarah Whiley died shortly after due to massive blood loss and shock. All beaches within more than a mile stretch, both east and west of the spot of the attack, were immediately closed. Although they weren't 100% sure, investigators made an educated guess and assumed multiple sharks were responsible for the attack. Police and fishermen set off to search the waters, trying to find the sharks, although they knew it was a virtually impossible task. The attack sparked a conversation about safety measures, mainly because that particular beach was protected by Queensland's Shark Safety Program and had been so since 1997. Then Acting Premier Anna Bligh ordered an investigation to assess whether the program was still effective. According to her, the attack proved the Shark Safety Program wasn't an impenetrable barrier between bathers and sharks. Initial reports said Sarah had been swimming with her dog, which was reportedly what had attracted the sharks in the first place. But these accounts soon proved to be false. In fact, there wasn't one specific reason for the attack. There were multiple ones. The gloomy weather and the murky water contributed to the events, and obviously so did the fact that Sarah had unwittingly swum too close to the baits. The hour was also a factor, with the attack reportedly happening sometime around 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and it all happened in January, when sharks are particularly active in the region. To most locals, the attack on Sarah Whiley could be seen as inevitable. Many of them were even surprised that something like that hadn't happened sooner. According to locals, there was a difference between them and mere visitors. Visitors didn't know the water. There should have been warning signs upon entering the beach. About 400 mourners attended Sarah Whiley's funeral. She was loved by her community and remembered as a fun-loving girl who lived life at full speed. According to her friends, Sarah had always been an exceptionally compassionate girl. Sadly, hers was the first shark-related death at a beach protected by Queensland's Shark Safety Program since the program's implementation in 1962. There are a few things that you can do to reduce the risk of being attacked by a shark in Australia. First, avoid swimming in areas where sharks are known to be present, such as near seal colonies or areas where there has been a recent shark attack. Second, stay in groups when swimming, as sharks are more likely to attack solitary individuals. Third, avoid swimming at dawn, dusk, or at night, as these are the times when sharks are most active. Finally, if you see a shark, try to get out of the water as quickly and calmly as possible. It's January 31st, 2011. 39-year-old Nicole Moore is enjoying her day at the beach. She's on vacation in Cancun with friends from her exercise group from back home in Orangeville, Ontario, and nothing is better than the tropical weather for these fitness-loving people. After an intense game of volleyball on the beach, Nicole's friends decide to head back to the hotel for some lunch, but she tells them to go ahead without her. She'd much rather take a little swim to refresh her spirit and wash the stubborn, soft sand off her skin. She doesn't know it yet, but this choice is going to change her life forever, put her beliefs to test, and terrify anyone who hears this story. Cancun is one of Mexico's most popular resort areas, and for good reason. Located on the Caribbean Sea, the city teems with life. Hotels, nightclubs, and malls coexist with colorful open-air markets and family restaurants, but nothing quite compares with the white, cool sand beaches. Nicole Moore had no reason to be tense as she entered the water that afternoon. If anything, she was happy about her vacation, her body buzzing with the memory of the recently ended volleyball match. Nicole didn't even swim that far from the shore. In fact, she was in waist-deep water, trying to scrub off some of the sand that got stuck to her body during the match. She had no idea her movements were stirring up something from underneath the waves. She also had no idea that 2 sharks had been spotted at a nearby resort and that employees on jet skis had managed to get only one of the creatures to steer away from the tourists. So when Nicole looked up from the water, she saw 2 people on jet skis. The woman naturally assumed they were other carefree beach enthusiasts. They were waving their arms and talking to her in Spanish from afar. She had no idea what they were saying and just assumed they were being friendly. Nicole smiled and waved back at the 2 people and then went back to enjoying her little swim. But then those 2 yelled again, and Nicole had the sinking feeling something was about to go terribly wrong. Then something cold and slimy bumped into her body, and the 39-year-old was gripped by true dread. For a split second, she dared hope it was just a little kid who was snorkeling and who she simply hadn't seen. Then realization. Horrible realization. The massive mouth opened and clamped down on her left thigh. The teeth were so sharp it was like they were tearing through butter. Nicole looked down and saw the water instantly turn red with her own blood. It was strange. She couldn't feel the pain, but the gruesome sight was enough to tell the woman she was in deep trouble. Adrenaline causes a profound physical response, due to which endorphins that act like natural painkillers are released. So it's quite natural that Nicole didn't feel the extent of her injuries, even though the barbed teeth tore through the flesh down to the bone and ripped out 2 of her quadriceps and 2 hamstrings. The shark's bite yanked away more than a foot of Nicole's skin and flesh. The woman was desperate to get out of the water. Her mind was filled with images of her young daughters Tia and Ella. They were only 6 and 7 years old, too young to experience the trauma of losing their mother. Nicole Moore chose to fight. Her left leg was rendered useless by the horrible bite. She couldn't move it at all, nor stand on it, so she had to make good use of her arms. The mother of 2 started using her arms to propel herself to shore, but the movements were imprecise and slowed down by her wounded leg's inertia. Nicole struggled to advance through the bloody waves. In the meantime, the fearsome shark was circling her, leaving no room for interpretation. It wanted a second taste. The beast lunged in an instant, clenching Nicole's left arm in its jaws. The needle-like teeth held tight. The shark had the woman's entire arm locked in its mouth. Nicole felt an incredible amount of pressure as the shark tried to pull her underwater. But seeing those teeth layered and serrated gave the woman another wave of strength. She chose to defy fear and maybe death and raised her right hand. She started hitting the creature erratically until she somehow managed to smash her open hand down on the shark's nose. That one punch saved her. Although it's widely agreed that the shark's most sensitive areas are its eyes and its gills, a well-placed hit on a shark's nose could potentially make the animal let go. And that's how this particular shark reacted. It let go of Nicole's badly wounded left arm and swam away. But the horror was far from being over for the woman. She now had to somehow get herself to the shore Despite the huge amount of blood she'd lost and the dreadful injuries both her upper and lower limbs had suffered. Her left arm was hanging precariously, her left leg had a gaping hole in it, and was essentially incapable of motion. You didn't have to be an expert to realize the situation was dire, but Nicole was, in fact, a nurse, and she knew her wounds were serious enough to be considered potentially fatal. She felt fainter by the second, and there was a great risk of her losing consciousness and simply drowning after putting up the fight of her life. But as it happens, Nicole wasn't entirely alone. In the end, it was humankind's innate desire to help another person in need that helped her. One of the people that had previously tried to alert her about the approaching shark rushed to her aid before she could disappear beneath the still bloodied waves. The man grabbed Nicole's right arm, gunning the jet ski and towing the woman to the shore. A trail of crimson blood was left in the water. Being back on the shore came as a small relief to Nicole. She was feeling weaker and weaker. People gathered around her. She could hear panicked voices talking in Spanish and English, but nothing was more present than her own thoughts. As a nurse, she had to do what she knew best. She took medical inventory of herself and finally asked the surrounding crowd for help. She couldn't go just yet. She had a loving husband and 2 amazing children, and she wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily, although it was getting harder to breathe. As a medical professional, the woman understood that losing so much blood caused respiratory distress, and every time her heart beat, blood squirted into the air. By the time Nicole arrived at the hospital, she had lost 60% of her blood. Her vital organs were shutting down, and she had lost consciousness. She was rushed into an 8-hour operation in a desperate attempt to save her life. The medical team had to insert a central line directly into the woman's heart and pump unit after unit of blood to make sure it didn't stop working. When Nicole woke up in the hospital, her father Alberto and her husband Jay were there. Even more, someone had found the missing piece of her left leg and brought it to the hospital, where it was reattached. But her suffering was far from its end. 6 days after the attack, Nicole was flown from Mexico to Toronto. Her father and her husband had struggled to find a hospital bed back home in Canada, but they finally managed to find a team who wanted to see Nicole through her ordeal. The new doctors were astonished to find teeth marks on Nicole's bones. But what really got them was that the woman's previous operations had been done carelessly. There was decay in her flesh, seawater and sand mixed with the bandaging. Her thigh had been reattached incorrectly. It wasn't getting any blood, so it was rotting away little by little. Multiple tissue transplants were required in order to cover Nicole's bone in flesh again, and her arm ultimately had to be amputated. But the attack never broke Nicole's spirit. She decided to stay and fight for her life and children. She overcame every obstacle, every bout of pain. She chose not to hate the shark. After all, it was her who had been trespassing in its natural habitat. Although shark attacks are incredibly rare in Cancun, in fact, there had been only 40 shark attacks in the whole of Mexico in the past 450 years. 11 months after her accident, Nicole returned to Cancun and even swam in the same waters in which she had nearly met her end. She has since become a motivational speaker, a shark conservationist, and a Shark Week beloved guest. This is the story of Jaimy Daigle, a young girl who ventured too far into the shark-filled waters of the Gulf of Mexico and paid with her life. It's a tragic, heartbreaking story, but it's also a story about how multiple people came together and tried to save a life. It was June 25, 2005, and 14-year-old Jaimy Daigle was on vacation with her friends. The teenager had just recently graduated 8th grade with honors, and she had plans to attend St. Joseph's Academy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jaimy herself was a Louisiana resident. The girl lived in the city of Gonzales. Her family, meaning her parents, Ronnie and Wendy, and her older brother Nicholas, were back home, but Jaimy was visiting Florida. In fact, on that Saturday, June 25, 2005, Jaimy was enjoying the waves of a Florida Panhandle beach. The Florida Panhandle is the name of the northwestern part of the state. The region is about 200 miles long and 50 to 100 miles wide, and it boasts some of Florida's most amazing beaches. The region's home to everything from quaint fishing villages to popular beachside cities. The climate is favorable all year round, with plenty of activities to satisfy the more adventurous tourists, those who'd rather go scuba diving than simply sunbathe on the shore. Jaimy and her friends were on a beach bordering the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf is old, older than most our minds can easily comprehend. It's 300 million years old. Over its long existence, it certainly witnessed countless events, and on that warm June day in 2005, the Gulf was once again a silent witness to a tragedy. Before this vacation in Florida, 14-year-old Jaimy Marie Daigle had spent part of her summer vacation volunteering at her church's summer camp for young children. She was now spending some well-deserved time with her friends before her first year of high school started. But as fate had it, Jaimy was never going to be a freshman. The day started well. Jaimy and her friend 14-year-old Felicia Venable played on the beach and swam in the Gulf's waters. They were having a great time, enjoying themselves and their time at the beach. Then the two teenage girls started venturing further and further from shore, beyond the first sandbar. Then the two of them passed the second sandbar too. Suddenly, Jaimy and Felicia found themselves about 100 yards from shore, too far from the keen eyes of any lifeguard or worrying adult. It's unclear why the girls swam that far away from land. Maybe they were just having fun and wanted to test their limits, or maybe they didn't think about it at all. It proved to be a fatal mistake. As the two of them were happily swimming and splashing around, they saw a dark shadow below the surface coming their way. Before they could do anything at all, the shadow became something far more dangerous. It was a shark, and a hungry one at that. Its small beady eyes and its sensitive nose were focused on one thing and one thing only: finding prey. The girls, so far away from any possible shape or form of help, were an easy target. They had no time to act. The beast struck, closing its jaws around Jaimy Daigle's leg. The shark pulled the girl underwater. When it broke away, the animal took part of Jaimy's leg with it. The girl's flesh was torn from hip to knee, exposing her bone. It took only an instant for blood to pool around Jaimy, turning the water crimson. Terrified and almost hysterical, Felicia Venable, Jaimy's friend, started swimming erratically toward the shore. She had just witnessed her friend being dragged under the waves and mauled by a fierce animal. Her horrified screams filled the air, which in turn caught the attention of several other beachgoers. They all sprung into action, although not all of them were entirely sure what had really happened out there. 23-year-old Chris White, a state health inspector and volunteer firefighter who had just gotten his EMT license, didn't know there was a shark in the water. He just saw a screaming girl swimming frantically toward the shore and an empty boogie board with no rider. At first, he thought maybe the other girl had gone under or drowned. Nonetheless, he sprung into action. Another beachgoer, Robert Atkinson, who was watching on shore, saw a fin and a pool of blood in the water. His stomach dropped, despite the feeling that the whole scene looked like something out of a bad movie. But Atkinson knew it was real. There was no cheap horror movie being filmed on the beach that day. What he saw was a nightmare, a real one. Back in the water, there was another man who noticed something was wrong and took matters into his own hands. Tim Dykes, a 54-year-old surfer, had also been enjoying the waves that day when he heard a scream. The man looked around, and that's when he spotted Jaimy Daigle's friend Felicia swimming as fast as she could toward the shore. The young girl seemed desperate to get away from something. It took a moment for Dykes to reach the spot that terrified Felicia so much. When he got there, he suddenly understood the girl. Tim Dykes saw 14-year-old Jaimy face down in a crimson-colored bloody circle of water. It wasn't hard to figure all that blood was coming from the girl. And it didn't take too long for Dykes to notice he and the girl weren't the only beings out there. When he looked in the water, Dykes saw a shark. It was obvious the animal had attacked the girl, and by the looks of it, it wanted to try some more. The beast was about to come up and attack again. Dykes put the girl, who by then was already unconscious, on his surfboard. The hungry shark didn't waste the moment. It tried to bite Jaimy's hand off, But Daigle and the other people who wanted to help the girl weren't just about to let the animal win. The 54-year-old surfer started towing the girl Jaimy towards shore, the shark close behind. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Chris was swimming toward the pair, wanting to help. He passed Felicia Venable, Jamie's friend, but the girl couldn't tell him anything about what happened out there. She was terrified, unable to speak properly. Shortly before Chris White reached Daigle and Jaimy, he could hear Daigle screaming and hollering. "There's a shark! There's a shark!" the older man screamed. White and another man with a raft reached Jaimy Daigle, who was still unconscious, and Tim Daigle. The waters were moving unnaturally around them. The shark was close by, waiting for a perfect moment to strike again. Chris White grabbed the girl off Daigle's board and pulled her into the raft. He tried not to think about the shark, which was swimming at his feet. But none of them could afford to be attacked. For a while, all the brave rescuers stopped swimming, their bodies going limp and standing vertical in the water. They only dared gently dangling their legs. They were trying to look less like food. It was Daigle who took charge of the situation. The surfer punched the shark in the nose, which deterred its attack for a little while, just enough to let them gather the courage to continue swimming toward the shore. It was hell. The shark wouldn't give up despite Daigle's best efforts to scare it off. 6 times the shark tried to attack, and all 6 times were met with the surfer's firm responses. When splashing the water to confuse the animal didn't work anymore, Daigle repeatedly punched it in the nose. And then they finally managed to get Jaimy Daigle to the shore, but it was too late for the 14-year-old girl. Paramedics were unable to revive her. The girl was dead. Authorities closed a 20-mile stretch of shore, but reopened it the following day, on Sunday, June 26, 2005. Despite this, residents living in a building next to the beach spotted a shark about 6 feet long, right at the shoreline on that morning. A makeshift memorial was created on the beach in Jaimy's memory. The tragedy was best summed up by Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry, who was interviewed at Jaimy's funeral. The man said, "You know, an innocent young lady who was enjoying the prime of her life, to learn what it means to be a teenager, to enjoy what it's like to enjoy high school and prom, and everything that comes with the simple things in life. And she won't get to experience that anymore."